Hi, and welcome to the COM 498 show. I'm Dr. Tony Palmieri from the Communication Studies program at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. Like all of you, I've heard these stereotypes that people in Generation Z, those are people born roughly between 1997 and 2012, I've always heard that that group will not read a newspaper, will not consume any serious news. So as a college teacher, I decided to test that theory, and I just got done teaching a class. It was called Rhetoric in Action, but I had all the students subscribe to the New York Times, and we did a deep dive into that newspaper. And I have with me today a student who was in that class. She just recently graduated, and her name is Emme Hornung. Emme, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
Absolutely. And before we talk about the New York Times and the class you were in, I need to say that Emmy just graduated with a 4.0 GPA, and she was given the Chancellor's Award for Excellence. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, Tony.
One thing that I would like to know, I've been teaching more than 35 years, and I've had only a handful of 4.0 GPA students. You're the first one in probably 15 years. Yeah. And this is what a lot of viewers want to know. How do you get a 4.0 GPA? Especially, I should say, Emmy is also full-time employed with the Experimental Aircraft Association in Oshkosh. She is a publications production coordinator. So working full-time and going to school, how did you maintain a 4.0 GPA?
Um, First of all, you got to be very organized. But I'll also say this. I've elementary school, middle school, high school, even my associate's degree, I've always been a straight A student. So I've just always done really well in an academic setting. I don't think it necessarily makes you the smartest person to have a 4.0, but I'll give myself credit where credit is due. It definitely took a lot of work to keep that average. But I think it was just the standard I set for myself when I came back to college to finish my bachelor's degree. I knew it would be another 2 years before I finished it. And I just knew those 2 years would more or less be my only opportunity to really dive in and learn something new and change my career and personal life and everything. So I just gave it my all. That's all I got for you.
Well, I was so glad that you really earned A's in my classes because I thought I do not want to be the one that wrecks her 4.0 GPA. So, so thank you for performing at that high level in
When I
my
was waiting for
classes.
my final grades to trickle in, I just had my fingers crossed. I was like, oh, is this going to be where it fails? Like, no,
Oh
we're
man.
good.
We'll talk more about you in a bit, but I'll just say here you have kind of set the bar, which is so appreciated in our program. But let's talk about that class. It was called Com 388, Rhetoric in Action. We studied in the New York Times, and um, when you first learned, I think I had emailed the class maybe a week or two before the class started, and I said you're going to have to subscribe to the New York Times. When you first got that notice, like what was your original thought? Were you like excited by that, puzzled by it?
Yeah, no, I was excited about it. At my work inbox every day, I'm subscribed to like the AP News, like daily highlights. So when I would come into work, I would check that out every day. And then I've always seen like headlines and news articles from the New York Times shared on social media, but it's always been behind a paywall for the most part.
Right.
So I've never really gotten a chance to read a lot of their content. So yeah, I was excited to kind of be able to dig deeper into it.
So did the class then provoke you to want to read it more or to read it with a different mindset? Tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I told you before, I used to spend a lot of my lunch breaks just scrolling TikTok or Reddit, and now I spend a lot of it actually just reading some of the New York Times articles because there's so much good information in there. Like it's behind a paywall for a reason. It's high quality, it's fact checked. They're not just putting out any old content. It's really engaging, and I've learned a lot reading just the opinion, the lifestyle section, stuff like that. So yeah, it's been really good.
Did that class help you become, say, now you've your critical thinking skills have been really outstanding in the program. But did this class provoke you to be a more critical reader of the legacy media like the New York Times?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always kind of considered like, why is this news source or why is this writer putting this out? What are their priorities? What are their goals with it? But I think taking this class and just digging through the New York Times so deeply, it made me realize like all the things I've been learning in my focus with rhetoric. Like these people are actually using these tools. Like this is real, and these are real ways to speak to an audience, and it actually works. So
Yeah,
definitely.
that's why the class is called Rhetoric in Action. It's
Right.
designed to study people that are actually doing rhetoric in the world. And one thing that I did in that class was assign each student a New York Times op-ed writer, or today they call it opinion page writer. And I assigned you, I believe, Maureen Dowd, who's been writing for the Times for a long, long time. Um, were you familiar with Maureen Dowd before that assignment?
Never heard her name before that assignment.
All right. And what was your experience of reading Maureen Dowd's columns?
I I'll say I love her writing style. The way she uses humor to approach really serious topics is just really inviting, I think, to an audience. And like that kind of mixture of professionalism and like deep knowledge and confidence and humor, like that is exactly the kind of writer I want to be in my career. So it was really inspiring to see such a successful person using that kind of persona, but also the topic she touched on, like she'd been talking about AI since like 2010 and she's still talking about it. So it was really, really cool to like not just look at the New York Times, but look at a specific author and see how their rhetoric changes over time and their own persona in their writing.
Yeah, I assigned those writers randomly, but I was really thrilled that through chance you got Maureen Dowd because she's one of those writers who, even when I disagree with her, which is probably 50% of the time at least, she really is, as you suggest, such an outstanding writer. As you say, the use of humor and other stylistic techniques. And being that you are a professional writer, I thought that you would benefit from reading someone like that. And it sounds like she's someone that you probably will now read regularly.
Definitely. I think I've read all of her articles that have come out since that assignment.
Yeah, and I always tell my students that, even taking one or two rhetoric classes, you now have the same skill set that professional writers for the New York Times and other publications have. So really, at this point, it's just a case of what kind of ambition or motivation do you have to write. In fact, Maureen Dowd and other opinion page writers usually write about 1,000 to 1,500 words in their column. And so I had everyone in your class, as you know, write a 1,000 to 1,500 word piece that would be designed for the New York Times. Tell everyone what your piece was about.
Yeah, so it was called Thrifting as a Luxury. I'm a very avid thrifter. I love the hunt of it, like going out, looking at every single piece of the thrift store and finding what I love, like this sweater I got, this wool sweater, got it for $4. I wear it all the time. But the piece it goes beyond like the awesome things that you can find at a thrift store. It kind of talks about how the more socioeconomic parts of like the luxuries of thrifting. It helps you avoid retail shopping in the traditional sense. Speaking of current events, Trump is trying to enact tariffs and he's rolling back environmental protections. The way we spend our money can kind of counteract those measures. Like thrift stores, they don't get affected by tariffs. Thrift shopping is far more environmentally friendly than going to a traditional retailer. And that kind of goes beyond that. I talk about how uh, the conservatism in fashion is kind of making a comeback. There's these trends like trad wife and everything, skirts are getting longer, dresses are getting longer. These are all kinds of signs that conservatism, gender fundamentalism is coming back. So
What
thrift
would you attribute that to?
uh, I think that has to do a lot with Donald Trump rhetoric and the rights rhetoric about like a traditional family in that sense. I think it comes from that.
It's kind of ironic though, right? A guy who's been, what, divorced 3 times, who
Right,
hardly has
exactly.
lived a traditional lifestyle,
Hmm.
becomes like the icon of that ideology. Just
Right,
incredible.
exactly.
Well, I thought your piece that you wrote on thrifting was really outstanding, and the Times does get literally thousands of submissions every week, but I really would encourage you to submit yours. I mean, the worst they can do is not publish it.
Yeah.
Another assignment in that class that I think that you really enjoyed, just to give a little context for our viewers, for about the last 8 years, every week the New York Times had a column called The Conversation, and it was between Gail Collins, who's a liberal, and Bret Stephens, who's a conservative. And every Monday for about 8 years, they would have this conversation where they'd give their views on the news. So I thought it would be a good idea to pair up students in my class and have them do that kind of conversation. So once again, that was chosen randomly, and you were paired with Taisto Oni, who is also a non-traditional student. And you ended up really liking that assignment, didn't you?
I did. I would say it was my favorite assignment from that entire class,
What
which is
was it about
ironic
that
because like
assignment? What was,
traditionally I don't like group projects, but this
yeah,
one was I got lucky with my partner, I have to say. He was
yeah,
great to
what was it about that you liked?
so much of being an online student, it's a lot of back and forth between you and your professor. Like there's discussion boards and everything, but students don't get super engaged in those. So just diving so deeply into a specific subject with another classmate and getting another perspective was really awesome.
Yeah, I tell you, I was pleasantly surprised reading them because it was the kind of assignment where I was expecting the worst. And we did have a few groups that had trouble scheduling, and one of the members got really frustrated. They would email me and say, "Can I do something to get their partner?" And I would say very politely, "No, I am not intervening. This is a this is a real world assignment." All right. I don't think Bret Stephens or Gail Collins got the editor of the paper to get the other one moving, right? But ultimately, it all worked out. And the conversation you had with Taisto, I thought was just super, super high status. I really enjoyed reading it. Let me ask you this, Emmy. Uh, do you think it would make sense for teachers in a variety of classes to mandate some kind of publication to read, either the New York Times or the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel or USA Today? Do you think it was valuable enough that you think it should be done in more classes than just one upper level elective?
I definitely think so because it's getting us engaged in current events in our communities, in our nation, and it just brings a more understanding to us in a social sense. So
Yeah,
I think it's definitely valuable.
and if my goal was to try and determine if in fact Gen Z will not read news, I'm happy to say that that theory was debunked. I mean, the overwhelming majority of people in that class ended up really enjoying diving into that paper. I think we had close to 30 students in there. I'm pretty sure one person never actually subscribed to the Times. All right. And I suspected another one also. And I confronted them both on it politely. One of them got very indignant just at my suggestion that they didn't subscribe, but they never proved to me that they did. The other one did admit that he had not actually subscribed, and then he finally did. When I made it clear to him that, especially that conversation assignment, would be really impossible to do. Oh, by the way, another assignment in there I'd like you to comment on was the one where I had students look at the New York Times as visual rhetoric. And I thought this was important because people in my generation, we remember the New York Times as this black and white print, very few photos. And now the digital New York Times is kind of like a visual spectacular. Were you somewhat surprised at the level of visual rhetoric in it?
I think given today and digital media, social media, so much of it is visual. Like that is how companies draw attention to them. Like if you're scrolling through the New York Times app, most of it are like the photos that are in the articles. And then the headline is a little smaller underneath the photo. So it's really what draws people in. So it definitely made sense to me that they are on top of their visual rhetoric because it's so important.
Were you overall, say, if you had to give them a grade on their visual rhetoric, would you give them an A? Would you give them a B?
Yeah, I think I would probably give them a solid A, A minus. I think they do a really good job of making sure that the tone is set. I mean, we kind of learned that the header image kind of serves as an introduction for the
Right.
article. So it sets the tone, it sets like the mood and everything and kind of gives you an idea of what to expect. So they do a good job of it.
Absolutely. I also had the students in that class listen to the New York Times Daily podcast. What was your impression of the New York Times? Now, I think you had listened to the Daily before the class, or maybe not.
I don't think I did.
All right. What is your impression of the New York Times Daily podcast?
Honestly, I'm blanking on that assignment right at this
That
moment.
was the one where I believe the podcast that you were assigned was the one that exposed the Chinese group on.
Oh, yes.
Remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
which I
they
was
kind of
fascinated by.
invited like different experts on for each episode to talk about it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And I did actually that class forced me to look more into the Times also. And I didn't know before that class that the Daily has actually been one of the most successful products that the New York Times has put out in many years. Yeah, it is wildly successful for them, especially at drawing in, and I think this was one of their goals, drawing in younger listeners.
Yes, exactly. Kind of like that visual rhetoric, like in today's age, like people can just turn on a podcast when they're on their morning commute to work and they're not like reading their phone in front of their face. So that's
Exactly,
good.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you found that class enjoyable, and you pretty much took all of my classes, I believe.
I took quite a lot of them.
Yeah, and that's a good transition into your experience in the Com Studies program. I think I saw you say on LinkedIn that it really wasn't until, and I don't want to pat myself on the back for this, but it wasn't until your Intro to Rhetoric class that things really started taking off for you. What was it about the Intro to Rhetoric class?
Yeah, so I'm very much like a trust my gut kind of person, and I enrolled in the communication studies program because communications was always something I was really weak at. Like my family growing up, we didn't really talk about things, and I kind of took that into my adulthood. So initially, my goal was to change that for myself personally. And once I took your class, Intro to Rhetoric, it kind of all just made sense. Like that was the universe telling me, like, you chose the right degree. Like this is where you're meant to be. Because I've always been someone that wants to use my voice to make things better around me, improve my community, but I never felt like I was the person who had the power to do that. And Intro to Rhetoric showed me like anyone can have that power. You just need to learn how to use it.
Wow, that's really fantastic to hear that. And then you really excelled in really every class in the program. And what, how would you describe your overall experience in the Com Study program? Like, are there a couple of words you might use so that if there are people out there who are thinking, maybe I want to go back to school and I'll and like take online classes. I know there's a lot of people out there working full time that maybe want to take classes. They're not sure if they can do it. What would you tell them about the Com Studies program?
Yes, if there was one word I would use, I would probably say transformative. Like, if you, so many other degrees, like you're going to learn something, you're going to be a professional in that field. But with communication studies, there's so many assignments where you have to reflect on yourself and past experiences that you've gone through. And you just kind of have to like realize certain things about yourself. And you learn so much about yourself through all these different classes, like interpersonal communication. There's that. And then organizational communication. I think I completely changed how I approach like different workplace situations like that. Like so much of my personal self, not just my professional self, truly was transformed through this program. So yeah,
That's
that's how I
just
would
that's
describe it.
that is so thrilling to hear because I know there are many people out there who still think that online education just can never be of any kind of high quality. But it sounds like you're saying that comm studies at UW Oshkosh online really was a high quality program.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
Wow, that's great. Now, I did say you are employed full time and you are a professional writer in your job. How has the college experience helped you with your professional writing?
Yeah, so on a professional writing standard, I guess when I first started out writing stories, like I've always been writing stories about people. I think one of my first, we, at the end of all of our articles, we have like a little writer bio about ourselves. And mine has always said she enjoys contributing human interest stories. So I've always been more interested on the human side of things rather than like the airplane side of things, working at EAA. And I I've shared these stories. I sh was writing stories before I started this program, but going through this program, it made me realize like the stories need to be told in the way that the person would tell it. Like it needs to truly reflect that person if you're going to tell their story. So that's become really important to me. But also just how I approach interviews. I think in the beginning, I kind of went into a lot of interviews with a lot of assumptions on how the interview would go, where the story would go. But I've since taken a step back and realized, like, no, like this person needs to be able to tell their story. I can't come into it with assumptions or like ideas of how the story will go. So, yeah.
That's great. And you just also recently finished a class with me called Capstone in Comm Studies. It's kind of like the last class that students take. And in that class, I asked students to come up with a post-graduation brand. And I believe you're calling yourself a passionate, purpose-driven storyteller. Is that correct?
Purpose, passion, people-driven storyteller.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so storytelling is really the essence of how you see yourself now, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Where now you might be at EAA for the long haul for all we know, but I know that this program has also got you thinking about other possibilities. What might be some other possibilities for you in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I know I want to stay in the nonprofit space because I mean, purpose, passion, people, like that's core to nonprofit. You're not really going to find that in a for-profit company. Those aren't their goals, it's the profit. Otherwise, I'd call myself a profit-driven storyteller. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I would love to maybe find a role with some sort of women's organization, even an animal rights organization. I worked with dogs for like 8 years before I came to EAA, so that's also something
really.
important to me.
What were you doing in that context?
So I was a animal caretaker and then I became a receptionist and then I also learned how to groom dogs in that time. So
Oh,
I had my
wow.
hands everywhere.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And you've also talked about possibly going to grad school at some point.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I love learning. You've said it many times through a lot of different lectures that I've listened to of yours, knowledge is power. And I that's so important to me. I have a little fortune cookie, little piece of paper that I keep on my desk at home that says knowledge is power. And
Wow.
yeah, I'm a lifelong learner. I love to learn more and I think it kind of like shows in the standard that I set for myself getting a 4.0 that I love learning.
If you were to go to grad school, do you think it would be in a rhetoric type program?
I think so, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you've definitely shown, a great talent in that area and a great passion for it. In fact, also in that capstone class, not only did I ask students to brand themselves, but I asked them to come up with a fresh metaphor for communication. And you were thinking of communication as a song. Do you remember what you meant by that?
Yeah, so I kind of took inspiration for the song metaphor from your Rhetoric of Rock course that I took with you because I just love seeing how music and society like influence each other, and it always kind of has. So I really wanted to stick with that theme for it. But then I think the full metaphor was communication is like a song. When it's done right, it'll change the mood and most importantly, make you get up and move. So
Yeah.
kind of like with rhetoric, like the goal is always to have some sort of action come out of your words or make people change. So
I
yeah,
love the idea
following
of
that.
setting the tone and getting people moving
Hmm.
because that touches into so many parts of communication that have been around for thousands of years, right? The
Right.
emotional appeal, the character appeal, and so on. And one thing I liked is that uh, before you came up with that metaphor, just to demonstrate to people that you can have meaningful interaction in an online program, we had discussed your metaphor, right? At first, you were
Hmm.
thinking of a symphony,
Yeah.
right? Which is great. But I kind of threw out the feedback that a symphony is kind of like rule-based and top-down and Eurocentric. And I think I threw out the idea of jazz fusion as being a
Yeah,
little, right? A little bit more improvisational, which it sounds like, well, our experience of communication is very improvisational, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, what you came up with was great. If we have students that are interested in contacting you, is it okay if they do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I will definitely forward on your contact information. And by the way, also I have to say, in the capstone class, we had a LinkedIn profile assignment, and not surprisingly, I ended up sending yours to so many students in the class. Right, there were people that were lost. Look, just use Emmy as a role model.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
well,
think
because you took the branding
right.
concept and actually did it. And I looked at your site recently, and I think you're doing with it what people should do if they're serious about it. You've got a couple of photos in there. You keep it updated. There's no grammatical or spelling errors, right? You
Yeah.
call your major communication studies. I always have to get on people who call it communications. That's not what we are. Anyway, Emmy, thank you so much for doing this today. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Tony. It was really an honor.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you again soon.